The text came late at night. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about the trip. We've decided to postpone it until next year." I stared at the screen, blinking. My heart sank. Postponed? We'd been planning this trip for months, our first family vacation in years. I'd rearranged my work schedule, budgeted every penny, and counted down the days like a kid waiting for Christmas. Postponed. The word echoed in my head as I dialed my mum's number, my stomach churning. When she picked up, I barely recognized the voice on the other end. "Alyssa, I know you're disappointed, but things are just tight right now. We can't afford it." I swallowed hard. I understood money struggles. I really did. I'd been pulling extra shifts at the cafe just to pitch in, even offering to cover my own airfare. But something about the way she said it, like the decision had already been made, like my feelings didn't matter, felt like a slap in the face, a cold, raw one. I took a deep breath, fighting back the sting. If it's about money, maybe we can find a cheaper hotel or shorten the trip, I suggested, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound calm. She hesitated. Just a moment of silence, but I heard it. A hesitation that spoke volumes. Then softly, she said, "Alyssa, it's just not the right time. We'll make it happen next year, I promise." A promise. One I should have known better than to believe. 2 days later, while I was scrolling through Facebook on my lunch break, it hit me like a ton of bricks. There it was. A picture of my mum and dad, smiling on a beach. My heart stopped. They looked so happy. Sun-kissed skin, drinks in their hands, the ocean behind them shimmering in the sun. My breath caught in my throat as I scrolled down for more. My brother Jake with his girlfriend laughing on a boat. My parents at a fancy seafood restaurant, plates of lobster in front of them, grinning like they were in paradise. The caption sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Family time is priceless. Family time. Except I wasn't part of it. According to them, the trip had been postponed. I locked my phone, the world around me spinning. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe it was a last-minute thing, maybe someone had gifted them the trip. But deep down, I knew the truth. They hadn't postponed anything. They just didn't want me there. That night, I didn't call my mum. I didn't respond to the post. Instead, I watched, feeling like I was drowning, as more photos poured in over the next few days. Snorkeling, bonfires on the beach, memory after memory made without me. And as I stared at each picture, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about the trip. This was about every single time I had been an afterthought, every birthday they'd forgotten, every holiday where my gifts were the afterthought while Jake got exactly what he wanted. All the times I sacrificed, gave up my time, my money, my heart, but they never did the same for me. I clenched my jaw, my fists tightening. They thought I would just let this slide, that I would stay quiet. But this time was different. When they got back a week later, I was waiting for them. I heard the taxi pull up and I watched from the kitchen window as my mum, dad, and Jake stepped out. Their tan lines a mocking reminder of their postponed trip. They looked tired but happy, sun-kissed, suitcase in hand, like they had earned their little getaway. I stood still, calm. They didn't know I had seen the photos. Not yet. The front door swung open and my mom was the first to spot me. "Alyssa," she said, her voice too bright, almost too cheerful. "Oh, sweetheart, I missed you. How have you been?" I folded my arms, my expression stone cold. "Busy." Dad walked in behind her, setting his bags down, trying to act like nothing was wrong. "That's good. How's work?" he asked, sounding like it was the most casual thing in the world. I let out a bitter, short laugh. Work. That's all I had done. Work and watch their betrayal unfold on my screen. Jake yawned, stretching his arms as if he had just come back from the most exhausting vacation in the world. He turned to me with a smirk. "Man, I'm exhausted. Traveling takes it out of you. Hope you held down the fort while we were gone." I looked at him, my anger flaring. "While we were gone?" I repeated, my voice low, controlled. like it was just a normal trip. Like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't spent the entire week replaying their betrayal over and over in my head. I took a deep breath. No more pretending. I turned to my mum, my voice as cold as ice. "So how was the trip?" She blinked, clearly caught off guard. She hesitated before answering, like she had to fabricate an excuse on the spot. "Oh, well, we just needed a little getaway. Nothing too special." Liar. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward them. The photos were right there. The beach selfie, the boat ride, the fancy dinner, and the caption, "Family time is priceless." I tilted my head, narrowing my eyes. "Looks special to me." For a long moment, there was silence. Heavy, awkward. Then my mom let out a nervous, forced laugh. "Alyssa, just don't!" I snapped, my voice sharp. My dad cleared his throat. "Look, sweetheart, it wasn't—" "Stop!" I yelled, my anger exploding. "Just tell me the truth. You didn't postpone the trip, you just didn't want me there." I saw the guilt flash across my mom's face, but she quickly masked it with a weak excuse. "It wasn't like that, honey. We just thought—" "What? That I wouldn't notice?" I cut her off, my voice shaking with rage. "That I wouldn't see the pictures? That I'd be stupid enough to believe your lie?" Jake groaned, rolling his eyes. "Oh my God, Alyssa, are you seriously making this a big deal? It was just a trip." Just a trip. The words hit me like a slap. The trip I had planned. The trip I had saved for. The trip I was supposed to be part of. I shook my head. "You could have told me the truth, but instead you lied. You made me feel like I wasn't worth bringing." Jake scoffed. "You're being dramatic." I let out a bitter laugh, finally letting everything out. "No, Jake, I'm finally being honest." My mom stepped forward, reaching for my hand. "Alyssa, please." I yanked my hand away. "No, not this time." They needed to hear this. This wasn't just about the trip. This was about every single time I had been treated like I didn't matter. Every holiday where Jake got exactly what he wanted, and I got whatever was convenient. Every time I put them first and they never noticed. The first real test came a week later. It was my birthday, and if history had taught me anything, it was that birthdays in our family had never been fair. Jake's birthdays were always a big deal. Parties, gifts, dinner reservations at whatever fancy restaurant he wanted. Mine, a card, maybe a phone call if they remembered. So I told myself I wouldn't expect anything this year. I told myself I wouldn't care. And yet, when I woke up that morning, there was still a small part of me, the part that still wanted to believe they could change, that hoped this time they didn't forget. At exactly 10 a.m., there was a knock on my door. I frowned, setting down my coffee. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I saw my mum and dad standing there holding a cake. My breath caught. They had never done this before. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," my mom said, offering me a tentative smile. I blinked at them. "You remembered?" My dad let out a small chuckle. "Of course we did." And for once, I believed them. They didn't just drop off the cake and leave. They actually spent the day with me. We didn't do anything extravagant. Just a quiet afternoon at my place, talking, catching up, eating cake that was a little too sweet but still perfect because it was mine. I swallowed, my voice shaking. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I gave enough, I'd finally be enough for you. But I never was I? No one said a word. Finally, my mom sighed. "Alyssa, it's not like we love Jake more than you." I let out a small, bitter smile. "Maybe you don't, but it sure feels that way." Another silence, and that was my answer. I nodded, exhaling sharply. Got it then. Without another word, I grabbed my purse and walked toward the door. "Alyssa, where are you going?" My dad called. I didn't look back. Somewhere I'm actually wanted. And then I left. For the first time in my life, I put myself first. For days, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from them, but I was done fixing things. This time, They could figure it out without me. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't respond to their messages. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to fix things. It was strange at first, ignoring them. The guilt crept in like an old habit, whispering in the back of my mind. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe you should just let it go. But then I would remember the text saying the trip was postponed, the Facebook posts of them having fun without me, the lie they told without a second thought. And suddenly the silence felt like freedom. By the 5th day, their messages had shifted. At first, they had been firm and dismissive, trying to regain control of the situation. Mom, Alyssa, we need to talk about this. You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. Dad, ignoring us isn't going to change anything. Call your mother. Jake, Jesus, Alyssa, get over it. I rolled my eyes. Classic. They weren't sorry. They just wanted me to stop making them uncomfortable. But when I didn't answer, the tone of their messages shifted. Ed, Mom, sweetheart, please, we miss you. We never meant to hurt you. Dad, we should have handled things differently. Let's talk. And then the one that nearly got me. Mom, Alyssa, I feel awful. I can't sleep knowing you're upset with us. For a brief moment, I almost responded. Almost. But then I asked myself a question. If I had never seen the photos, would they have ever told me the truth? Would they have ever felt guilty at all? The answer was painfully clear. So I locked my phone and let the silence continue. It wasn't easy. I had spent years being the one to reach out first, the one who smoothed things over, the one who made excuses for them. So sitting with the silence, holding my boundary, felt unnatural at first. But as the days passed, I realized something. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they missed the role I played in their lives. The fixer, the peacekeeper, the afterthought who never made waves. And now that I was refusing to be that person, they didn't know what to do. A week after their return, I did something I had never done before. I booked a weekend trip for myself. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet cabin in the mountains, far away from everything. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and left without telling anyone where I was going. For once, I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't waiting to be included. I was just living for myself. And it felt amazing. By the time I got back, my phone was full of missed calls and texts, but I didn't rush to respond. I wasn't ready yet because, for the first time in my life, I was finally putting myself first, and I wanted to enjoy the feeling a little longer. They weren't used to me ignoring them, so when my silence lasted longer than they expected, they showed up at my door. I was ready. I knew it was coming the moment I ignored their calls, their messages, their guilt trips. I knew my parents wouldn't just let it go, so when I heard the knock on my door that Saturday afternoon, I wasn't surprised. I took a deep breath, setting down my coffee. My hands weren't shaking, my heart wasn't racing, I was steady, ready for this. I opened the door to find my mom and dad standing on my porch. They looked different. Not angry, not smug, not demanding. They looked nervous, uncertain. I almost didn't recognize them. Alyssa, my mom said softly, her voice tinged with hesitation as she tucked her purse under her arm. Can we come in? I leaned against the doorframe, studying them. Depends, I replied evenly. Are you here to actually listen, or just to tell me why I'm wrong for being upset? My dad sighed, a long, weary sound. We're here to talk. Really talk. I studied their faces for a moment. They weren't ordering me to let them in. They weren't dismissing my feelings like they had in their messages. They were asking. That was new. It hit me that maybe, just maybe, this was the first time they were actually treating me like an adult. I stepped aside, my voice cold but controlled. Fine, I said, come in. I led them into the living room. The air felt thick with things unsaid, emotions bubbling just beneath the surface. My mom sat on the couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes cast downward. My dad stayed standing, like he wasn't sure where he belonged in this. I sat across from them, arms crossed, waiting. It was my mum who finally spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know where to start. The truth is a good place, I said flatly, not bothering to sugarcoat it. She flinched and I saw my dad exhale through his nose, a sound of frustration mixed with guilt. We messed up, he said, his voice unusually quiet. I blinked. I hadn't expected him to say that. Not like this. My mom's gaze dropped to her hands. Elisa, when we said the trip was postponed, it was a lie. No excuses. No dancing around it. Just the truth, she admitted, the words falling out heavy and unsteady. I swallowed hard, feeling the lump in my throat. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then finally said, We thought it would be easier. Easier? I pressed, the question hanging in the air like smoke. For who? There was a long pause. Silence for you. I pushed, pressing them harder, for Jake. I let out a bitter laugh. Easier? For me? You didn't think this would hurt me? My dad ran a hand over his face, eyes not meeting mine. We didn't think it would hurt you this much. I scoffed, bitter anger rising in my chest. You didn't think at all. My mom's voice cracked, a painful sound that made my heart twist, though I wasn't sure if it was from regret or guilt. We thought you'd understand. Understand. That word. The same word they had used in their messages. The one that meant nothing. It felt hollow now. Empty. I leaned forward, my voice cold and cutting. Tell me the truth. If I hadn't seen those pictures, would you have ever told me? Would you have ever felt guilty? Neither of them spoke, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing my voice to stay steady. Do you have any idea what that felt like? To see you all having fun without me? To know that I was never even considered? My mom's eyes shimmered with guilt, her lips trembling as she tried to find words. Elisa, we love you. I shook my head, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. You don't treat people you love like that. My dad sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. We failed you, sweetheart. We should have been honest. I stared at him, my heart heavy with everything left unsaid. And then I asked the question that had been eating away at me, the one that had been sitting on my chest for too long. Why are you really here? To apologize or to make yourselves feel better? They hesitated, unsure, but then my mum said quietly, Both. At least that was honest. More than I had expected. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, each of us trapped in our own thoughts. Finally, my mum spoke again, her voice shaky. I don't know how to fix this. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of all the years of being second place settle into my bones. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need them to fix it. I needed them to understand. But more than that, I needed them to understand that it would never be the same again. I wasn't going back to being the afterthought, the peacekeeper, the one who always made the effort. I don't know either, I admitted, the words heavy but necessary. But I do know this. I'm not going to be the one to fix it for you, Ak. My dad nodded slowly, as if the realization had hit him just then. My mom wiped at her eyes, a small, silent gesture of regret. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I met her gaze, my heart aching in a way I hadn't expected. That's up to you. They thought an apology would be enough, but apologies don't erase years of being treated like an afterthought. This time, they had to prove they were willing to change. Apologies were easy. Change, that was the hard part. When my parents left that day, I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel like anything had really been fixed. They had admitted their mistake, they had apologized. But I had heard apologies before. Words were nothing compared to actions. It was their actions that had always told a different story. And this time, I wasn't interested in words. I wanted proof. For the first time in my life, I didn't go out of my way to reach out first. I didn't text them good morning. I didn't send updates about my life. I didn't check in to see if they needed anything. For the first time, I made them do the work. At first, nothing happened. Days passed, then a week, then 2, and I thought, there it is. That's the proof I needed. If I wasn't the one putting in the effort, there was no effort at all. I should have known. I should have expected it. But somehow, it still hurt. It wasn't until the 3rd week that things began to shift. It was a random Tuesday when my mum called. I let it go to voicemail. Then came a text. Mom. Hey, sweetheart, just thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the distance. But another part of me, the part that had been waiting for any sign that they actually cared, hesitated. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I waited. The next day, my dad texted too. Dad, miss you, kid. Let's get dinner sometime. I stared at the message, emotions colliding inside me. Not because I was ready to let them back in, but because for the first time, they were trying. I agreed to dinner, not because everything was forgiven, not because I was ready to pretend like nothing had happened, but because I needed to see if they were serious. We met at a quiet restaurant, just the 3 of us. Jake wasn't there, and that alone told me they had been paying attention. We sat down, and for the first time in years, my parents asked me about me. Not about Jake, not about work, not about whether I could help them with something, just me. I wasn't sure if it was genuine or if they were just trying to fix what was broken, but for the first time, they were actually listening. And that was new. Halfway through dinner, my mum cleared her throat. We've been thinking a lot about what you said, she said carefully. About how we've treated you. I took a sip of my water, staying silent. She continued. And we've realised that we always assumed you didn't need us the way Jake did. That because you were strong and independent, we didn't have to put in as much effort. I met her gaze, and she swallowed. And now we know that was wrong. I glanced at my dad. He nodded. We see it now, Elisa. We do. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Those were the words I had been waiting for my whole life. And yet part of me still didn't believe them. Not yet. By the time dinner ended, something had shifted. Not in a dramatic everything is fixed way, but in a maybe this time they actually mean it way. They still had a long way to go. But for once, they were the ones taking the first steps. And for now, that was enough. But words were still just words. And if they really wanted to fix things, they were going to have to prove it. Dinner had gone better than I expected, but I wasn't naive. I knew that one meal, one conversation, wasn't enough to undo years of being treated like an afterthought. I wasn't looking for a quick fix. I wasn't looking for another empty apology. If my parents truly wanted to change, they had to prove it. There were no rushed goodbyes, no feeling like I was just an obligation. For the first time in a long time, it felt like they wanted to be there. And I didn't realise how much I had needed that until it actually happened. A few weeks later, they proved it again. I had a big presentation at work, something I'd been nervous about for weeks. I had mentioned it briefly over dinner one night, not thinking much of it. But when the day came, I got a text from my mum. Mom, thinking of you today. You're going to do great. And then one from my dad. Dad, let us know how it goes, kiddo. Proud of you no matter what. I stared at my phone for a long moment. They had never done this before. I wasn't used to them remembering the little things. And yet here they were, trying. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments where old habits crept back in. Mum still occasionally defaulted to making excuses for Jake. Dad still struggled to express himself in more than a few words. But the difference was, they caught themselves. They noticed when they messed up, and they tried to do better. And that mattered. One night a few months later, my mum called me. Not for anything in particular, just to talk. At some point in the conversation, she sighed. Mum, I know it's going to take time for you to trust us again. I swallowed, my voice barely a whisper. Yeah, Mum. Then we're not giving up, Elisa. You're too important to us. I felt my throat tighten because for the first time, I believed her. For the first time in my life, I finally felt like I mattered. Change didn't happen overnight. There were still moments when I caught myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for my parents to slip back into their old habits, for them to forget to stop trying. But weeks passed, then months, and they kept showing up. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't effortless. But for the first time in my life, I finally felt like I mattered. One evening, I was sitting on my back porch sipping tea when my phone buzzed. It was Mum. Not an apology, not a guilt trip, just a simple text. Mom, thinking of you. How's your week going? I stared at the screen, something warm settling in my chest because that message wouldn't have existed a year ago. A few weeks later, I got another surprise. I had been saving for a trip, a solo vacation just for me. I hadn't told my family much about it, mostly because I didn't want to deal with their opinions. But then one night at dinner, my dad asked, "Dad, so when's your trip?" I blinked. "Me. You remember?" He smirked. "Dad. Of course. It's Italy, right?" My mum nodded. "Mum, we were actually talking about it the other day. Do you need help with anything? Packing? Planning?" I studied them carefully, waiting for some catch, but there wasn't one. They weren't offering because they wanted something in return. They were offering because they wanted to be part of my life, and that was new. The night before my flight, I got a text from Jake. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. "Jake, Mum won't say it, but she's freaking out about you traveling alone. You know how she is." I rolled my eyes. Typical. Then another message came through. "Jake, you're doing it, huh? Living your life on your own terms?" I hesitated before replying. "Me? Me? Yeah, I am." There was a long pause before his final message arrived. "Jake, that's kind of badass, sis." As I stepped off the plane in Rome, the weight of the last year settled on me. I had spent so much of my life waiting for my parents to realize what they were missing, waiting for the day when I wouldn't feel like an afterthought. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I was choosing myself. I had built a life where I didn't have to chase their approval, and somehow, in doing that, they had finally learned how to show up for me. A few days into my trip, I was sitting at a cafe when my phone buzzed. It was a group message. "Mum, we just saw your latest photos. Rome looks amazing. Call us soon, we miss you." I smiled, not because I needed their approval, but because, for the first time, they weren't just saying the words. They meant them. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.